Welcome to the Life After Cancer podcast, made possible by the National Lottery Community Fund. I'm Steph, founder of Life After Cancer. I've been through cancer myself, and I know that when treatment ends, life doesn't always return to normal. Here we talk about the emotional, practical, and often invisible parts of life after treatment through lived experience and professional insight. These conversations share real experiences and perspectives. They're not medical advice and can't replace support from your healthcare team. If you're navigating life after cancer, supporting someone you care about, or working in cancer care, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Returning to work after cancer is something many people assume will feel like a positive step, a sign of moving forward, a return to normal, or a marker that treatment is over. But for many people, it's one of the most complex parts of the whole experience. An estimated 40 to 50% of people diagnosed with cancer are of working age, and yet research shows that 68% of people did not feel supported when returning to work after cancer. So today's conversation is about the reality of going back to work, what makes it harder than expected, and what helps you make it work in a way that feels manageable and realistic. If you're preparing to return, already back and finding it tougher than you thought, or questioning what work means to you now, this episode is for you. And to help us explore this properly, I'm joined by two brilliant guests. Lisa Wade leads people operations across the UK, Ireland, Western and Southern Europe at Radisson Hotel Group. She works closely with leaders and teams across a large international organisation, including supporting employees returning to work after illness. Lisa was diagnosed with breast cancer during the pandemic and underwent significant treatment, and she is currently on maintenance treatment. And that experience has shaped how she thinks about support in the workplace. So she brings both professional expertise and lived experience to this conversation. We're also joined by Tabitha. Tabitha was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 29. She had just started a new job at a venture capital firm and was only 4 weeks into the role when she found a lump during a self-check at home. This was during the pandemic when hospitals weren't allowing visitors and many of us were still living with restrictions. And just the year before, Tabitha had run her first half marathon and was the fittest she'd ever been. She has now returned to work after treatment and joins us today to speak openly about what returning to work was really like, what felt difficult, and what helped along the way. Welcome both. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good.
Good, thank you.
Excellent. All right, Tabitha, let's start with you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your cancer experience and where you are in your life after cancer now.
Yes, I was 29 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had just started a new job, which was my dream job, 4 weeks into that, working for a venture capital firm. And my breast cancer was ER and PR positive. I had a lumpectomy, sentinel lymph node removal, and radiotherapy, and then was put on hormonal treatment for what turned out to be 2 years, but it was supposed to be 5 years. In terms of where I am now, I'm working for a law firm, working full-time, working with a lot of entrepreneurs is my day job. I'm not a lawyer. And I have built in, from my learnings, a lot of flexibility to enable me to work a full-time job.
And what was your work situation when you returned to work post-treatment?
So I didn't actually stop working. The company that I was working for did, however, make the role redundant after a year. So I then had to negotiate whilst going through treatment, trying to find a job and interviewing, which was pretty daunting. And when I found a new role, which I'm in now, I actually only asked for a 6-month contract, starting with part-time the first 3 months, full-time the next 3 months, and then we agreed at the end of the 6 months that we would decide whether that was working for both parties.
Lisa, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do and the kind of work you're responsible for.
Of course. So unfortunately, I can really resonate with your story, Tabitha. Also diagnosed with primary breast cancer that spread to the lymph nodes. I was actually 45. I don't know whether that's worse or better. right in the thick of the pandemic, with two children, a puppy that actually found my tumour, and working in hospitality. So crazy time to be in that industry when the world was shutting down as we know it. So yes, I think I come at it as an angle from a patient, but also as a HR director.
And Lisa, what do you have to do within your line of work? What are you responsible for?
So I'm a HR director for an international hotel chain. I've been with the company for 26 years now. So quite different than yourself. I was quite established in my role, but still a huge shock to my life. But I think my professional and personal experience enabled to give me a deep understanding of what I suppose a supportive workplace should look like and what a return to work place should look like.
And thinking about your line of work and you having had that experience of having cancer and returning to work, how has that shaped how you support other people now?
I think it gives me a better understanding of what I suppose a true crisis looks like, and what somebody might require after, returning to work, or if somebody wants to work during their treatment. I don't assume anything anymore. I'm also quite aware that not you don't necessarily always get the support that you need from your GP. They're perhaps under-resourced, but they don't necessarily give you any kind of plan or support in that way. So you're very reliant on your medical specialist, but also on your workplace being, I suppose, empathetic, understanding to try and put meaningful steps into place. So having been there and also now returned to work and back full time, just like Tabitha, I think I'm a lot more practical about what that looks like. It's not linear. You need to think about the steps and what your role actually is, and therefore what you need to think about, but also the line managers or the support network that you might need in the workplace. I think I'm a lot more attuned to what that should look like.
Yeah, and what you said about I don't assume anything is so important because I think so many workplaces do, don't they? When you've got your HR hat on, what do you think people think their return to work is going to look like? And why do you think it's often harder than what they think it's going to look like when they return?
Because you're a different person than you were when you went into it, and you're probably never the same person. And I don't necessarily say that as a bad thing, but you change your perspective and you change your viewpoint on life. But also physically, emotionally, mentally, cognitively, you're a different person. Particularly if you've been through, I think, significant chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and any other treatment plan. Those things all have take their toll in terms of physically, mentally, and all the things I just said and how you feel. Therefore, I don't think the employee truly realizes the true impact of that until they're sort of projected back into the workplace. And it's one thing doing a treatment, coming home, sitting on an armchair, and maybe being a bit kinder to yourself. And it's another thing being shunted into the workplace, whether that be a physical work, such as, I don't know, a nurse or an engineer or something, and then suddenly be expected to conform to a routine, get up in the morning at a certain time, report to work at a certain time, have goals and targets on your head, and generally compute things. And my experience was, I remember my first month back in work, I couldn't entirely remember even what people were called. Crazy, having been there for 20 odd years. I remember manipulating some information on an Excel file, and it took me absolutely ages because my brain just wouldn't work in the way that it used to. And I think that was an impact of the chemotherapy, but also the early menopause. And there was many, many things that you don't think about until you're actually in it. So my best advice to somebody would be, take that medical advice from your medical professionals, which I found the hospital and those that were primarily treating the care were the best place to advise. Continue with what you can do, engaging outside, whether it be with Macmillan or anything to help you cope, but also make sure your return to work plan is thought through. Is it practical? Is it reasonable? Does it consider your symptoms? And be prepared to raise your hand and say, this isn't working for me. But also your manager should also be proactively checking in.
Thank you, Lisa. Tabitha, before you returned to work, what did you think it would look like and what was the reality?
I think the biggest piece of advice, which is off the back of what Lisa was saying, is always build in a buffer. You want to be forward thinking, you want to be positive. If you're in the place where you're thinking, yes, let's get back to work, I really want to take hold of my life now. Always building in a buffer with your manager and giving yourself that time, because, which is why I did the 3 days and moved to the 5 days after 3 months. And I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was a practical thing to do, but actually the psychological impact of having Thursday thinking, I think I could be in work now, and that progressing and building up, rather than trying to do 4 days, trying to do 5 days, and having to tap out and go and ask your employer and say, I'm not feeling great. And you question yourself at the best of times, and particularly with hormonal treatment, and if you have brain fog and chemo brain, all these things really impact your cognition and therefore how you feel about yourself. And it's so easy to essentially gaslight yourself into a situation that isn't benefiting your recovery. So I think having that open dialogue with your manager is very important. I think build a plan, but then make it easier for yourself, like pull it back so that you have that safety net, and then only build it up when you are confident that you can. And I think it's similar to what you were saying, Lisa, with different side effects coming through. It's an ever evolving beast, having cancer, having treatment, recovering from that treatment. So, many people are on long-term treatment, and that in the workplace again is another challenge. I found with the hormonal treatment that it was described to me as actually your symptoms will plateau. So they'll be bad at the start, and then your body will get used to the treatment and it will plateau. What actually happened is the longer that I spent on this hormonal treatment and the longer I was without these hormones, the more side effects I got, and therefore the more challenges I had in the workplace and the different conversations that I needed. So the fundamental point that you need to be able to rely on with those conversations in the workplace is having this malleable flexibility and the trust that you will communicate when you need something different, and that your employer, I imagine from an HR perspective, it's a difficult situation to be in as the employer anyway. So if you do your part as the patient to really be as honest as you can, then, which is scary, but it benefits you in the long term. Another example actually that has just come to mind is that when I needed a break, which I did during the day, it was never a clean-cut 9 to 5 with your energy levels. That doesn't really exist. So you need to be able to build in buffers.
It's a roller coaster.
Exactly. Post-meeting, pre-meeting, you need to think about your meals, all this sort of planning, which sounds exhausting, but when you do get used to communicating that with your sort of close employees, your colleagues, they understand. So I would go down to the front desk and say, can I book a meeting for half an hour? Usually I would only need to be lying on the floor in the dark with my eyes closed for 15 minutes and I would start to feel better. But I would give myself that buffer, and then after half an hour, I'd go back to work. And it's just having that safe space within the workplace that I think is so important, with allowing someone to have those sort of step-by-step building blocks. 3 years later, having come off treatment, I'm now working full-time, but I still need buffers. I still need cancer days. I still need an element of that, but 80% of the time I don't.
Yeah, and if I can pick that point up, I think you make a really relevant point there. In terms of you still need buffers, which most people in an employer would never even consider unless they'd been there themselves. And two, what you said about your hormone treatment, I was exactly the same, and the advice that I was given was exactly the same, whereas in reality, it was an utter car crash. My symptoms only got worse, and then I went through the menopause, and I actually had to adjust those drugs. So I think that's really important what you say, that you can take the best advice, but in reality, you know how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis and what that looks like. But you need to be prepared to have the confidence and the courage of conviction to say to your employer, I'm feeling like an utter car crash today, or actually, I need to do this, I need to do that. And you actually amazed me that you did 3 days back to back, because that was one thing that I had to really think about, actually, that I might need to cushion in some days within a working week and spread my time over the 5 days. So I take my absolute hat off to you, because I know it's not easy, and I think it's an employee thinking, I can have that conversation, and I need to be prepared that, as I said, this isn't linear. It's a roller coaster. There's going to be curveballs thrown at you, and they're gonna adjust, but you're going to be okay. You just need to be prepared to say, this might look like this today.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa, if we're thinking about this from your HR role, what does the workplace, what do employers assume when someone comes back to work post treatment?
Yeah, and I'll answer this sort of generically, because I'd hate to say that I would assume that employers think or feel anything, and some will be better than another. But I think the first thing that employers need to do is to be prepared to, this isn't predictable like normal illnesses. So I think they need to be prepared to factor in that unpredictability, and be prepared to be led by the patient, but also create that environment that those conversations can take place. And what does that practically look like?
And between you, you've spoken about having a safe space where you feel confident to say these things without there being a consequence. And I think a lot of people don't feel safe enough to say that they feel that way, let alone, can't remember what the percentage is, but quite a high percentage of individuals don't feel safe enough to even tell the workplace they've had cancer. If we're putting the responsibility on the individual, what can they do to move that forward?
I think they can start the conversation. So, as I said, be led by the employee in the treatment. If they're away from work or working a certain amount of hours during treatment, what does that conversation look like? When does the person want to be contacted? What information do they want to know? Sometimes we assume, and actually we don't communicate very well, and that can make it worse. Make the employee feel part of that return to work plan, be led by them, have that conversation, address that from a risk assessment point of view, and then say to them, is that what you anticipated? Does that look right? But also check in when they're on that return to work plan. Is it going well? What could we adjust? How are you feeling? But as you said, not everybody will have the confidence to have those conversations, and not everybody will also, unfortunately, always be met with that level of empathy and support that they should. So knowing that people have, I suppose, rights, but also they have options if it doesn't go their way. I actually met somebody at an event, and they were a professional person, and they said to me that they hadn't told their employer, and they had no intention of telling their employer, because they were frightened as to how that would be perceived by the workplace. And that's, for me, is quite sad, because the employer can't support them, and they can't get the support they need if they can't have that conversation.
Yeah. I think that's where the majority of people are at. What I love about this conversation is that the responsibility is almost put on the person who has finished cancer treatment. You return to work and you expect the workplace to do the work. And most people haven't had the relevant training. They're unsure what to do.
True.
So I think if the person returning, I heard that on you, Tabitha, they go in like, no, I'm going to be really clear with where I'm at and what I need. But what comes before that is the individual having an understanding of what that is. And I think so many people can't even get themselves to that place.
I had a call with the charity Working with Cancer.
Yeah.
When I was at the original job that I was diagnosed at. So during that time, I spoke to them, and they laid out what my rights were, and being labelled as a disabled person in the workplace offers protection, and that the employer has to provide reasonable adjustments offers protection. And I think that that in itself gave me confidence to be able to speak about what was reasonable to me. And then if they're a good employer, they meet you halfway. But if they're not a good employer, you then have grounds to have a very serious conversation about that. But that only works if you share what you genuinely need. And I think because it is a long road and it's different for everybody, cancer is different for everybody just in terms of the diagnosis that they get, but also the life that they want to lead. Those two are two things that can't be assumed by any employer. So there needs to be flexibility within this conversation. And if there's a large corporate, they'll be having this all the time. If it's a small company and you feel daunted by the culture that exists and sort of upsetting the apple cart, then I can see that will be hard to take on. But please know that you have backup. You do have a structure behind you that will enable you to hopefully get to a place where you can start to get back into work. It is a journey. It's not a, great skip and jump out the front door and off I go to work. It looks the same as your treatment, to be honest. You're asking questions, you're writing down what your symptoms are, you're trying to work out how to make them better, you're talking to your family and friends and asking for support on that. You're having a day under the duvet. It's all there.
And again, I think what you said is all very relevant, because that navigating, and it is a journey, isn't it? It is a true journey that doesn't stop. And that navigation can feel utterly overwhelming. So it's great if employers are positive and meet the employee in the middle and can have those conversations. But as you said earlier, it really depends on the quality and confidence of that line manager as well. So making sure they're equipped with the skills, and the employee feeling that if it's not going well and they're not getting the answers or the support they need, to say that this isn't working for me because I think, if we're all being honest, even me as an employer in the role that I do, never had a true appreciation that when somebody comes back to work, they may actually still be under treatment. In my case, I'm in treatment for 10 years, and they may still be feeling the consequences of those treatments for years. And I think that education piece there from an employer and a line manager is really needed, so they're equipped with the skills to give practical support.
Tabitha, I just wanted to touch on something that feels a little bit off-piste here, but identity and career. And did cancer, returning to work, did that change how you saw yourself in the workplace?
It's a great question. Being diagnosed knocks your confidence anyway, because you're having to look at yourself in a different way and you're being challenged in a different way. And the relationships around you are also being challenged. So there's a lot of things that feel like they're potentially shifting. When you put that sort of environment back into the workplace, or in my case, I was still in the workplace, and I would say, I'd tell my colleagues, I'm just going to go and work up on the terrace because I need to be outside and I need fresh air, and I'm going to take my calls up there. And that's where they would find me for 2.5 hours, and then I'd come back down when I got cold or it was lunchtime or something. But I was very vocal about that. That innately knocks your confidence, because you're having to put yourself in a different situation and have a conversation that you otherwise, wouldn't need to do. When I went on to the next job and I was having to interview, again, that was challenging because I wasn't sure how I would be viewed as a patient still going through cancer, and yet interviewing and asking for a job, please. But again, I made an effort to focus on the skills that I knew that I did have, rather than lean in hard to what I needed as a cancer patient. Those conversations came later. What has happened over the last 3 years is I definitely noticed that my confidence needed rebuilding. So my confidence in my energy levels, my confidence in being able to go to a networking event, my confidence in being able to go to an early breakfast, to fit 2 calls back to back, all those things that seem so small when you're healthy, aren't when you're not. And having to manage your energy levels and not be in a place where you're floundering, feeling like you need to just go and crawl into a hole, and yet you have responsibilities to your employer or you've committed to this meeting. That pressure and that guilt is really hard to navigate. But what I found is that is when you grow with your boundaries. And for example, if I woke up not feeling well, the morning hadn't gone well, and I wanted to do some stretching, and I was cutting it very fine to being able to make this meeting. What would be best for my brain and my brain fog would be to bike or be outside walking to work. Timing wise, I only had time to take the tube. I would always message and either postpone the meeting, because things can always be postponed. And P.S. people love cancelled meetings. We all do. Or join remotely. So if the reasonable adjustment is that you have a work phone with headphones, that means that you can join on the go. They don't need to see a video of you. You can make notes on your other phone. It's totally workable. But those are the things that I think when it comes down to the wire, you have to prioritize your health. And that is how you build up your confidence. If I continuously took the tube, it would take 2 hours for my brain to recover. And that doesn't benefit the employer. So you have to be the one to really like brace yourself for that guilt. It's a horrible place to be. I understand. But I saw the benefit of being brave and building in those boundaries, and they've paid dividends later on.
So did what you saw as doing well or success at work, did that change for you?
Yes. It absolutely did. Because previously it was, I'm a proactive person, and I like to use the time that we are given on this planet anyway. But when you are juggling with your health and not feeling well, you need to be able to flex and really put your health first. And therefore success for me would be building in buffers between meetings, eating the right food at the right time, being able to manage my afternoon if I had an evening event, so that I could have a half an hour lie down before having a pre-snack food before then going out to the event, because events never have healthy, nutritious food. They always have sugary drinks. Planning in that way, that is a successful day for me. That if I've managed to get from the morning to an evening event in one piece, I'm chuffed. Super chuffed with that. And it brings down the balance of being ambitious, hitting work goals. That it happens. It will happen. It will continue to happen. You will be able to build up your career as and when you are able to. But whilst you are living through cancer and recovering, you need to protect yourself, and you need to really build up that reserve of confidence that you can make it through events. And that requires focusing on you and your health.
I love your confidence and I love your boundaries. If someone's listening and they're thinking, oh, that's great, how do I do that?
I wasn't like that before. I was a person that would pack everything in and I would be on the floor at the end of the day. And that is something that I've had to learn. And it is something that I have grown in confidence with, because I think the thing that gives me confidence, honestly, is talking about it. Because people understand. Mm-hmm. They understand, but if you don't talk about it, then you're having that argument with yourself only. And that's really hard. But as soon as you voice it, people get it. Like they really, I have not had anyone say, oh, really? You need another rest? No, that's never going to happen. But you know when you need a rest. They don't. So that's the dynamic. It's uncomfortable at first, but genuinely, like, I remember the reason I use the tube and the bike as an example is because I remember standing at that crossroads, fighting with myself mentally, being like, the tube is not the right route for me and my health. And I hated postponing that meeting. I felt so awful that I wasn't being responsible or good at my job, and nothing happened. The fallout, that whoever it was, I can't remember what the meeting was. That's how insignificant it actually was. It was very important at the time because I really didn't want to make that call, but I did.
It's the pressure you put on yourself, though, isn't it?
Always. I was so proud of the fact that I had done that, and then it's that feeling that encourages you to make that decision again, and again, and again.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah.
So should someone who's returning to work after finishing their cancer treatment, should they expect a formal assessment?
Yeah, the answer to your question is yes, but it shouldn't feel so procedural that the person just feels they're almost going through some kind of formal appraisal, that we're just ticking the boxes. It needs to be really human and putting that person at center stage, really, to have that conversation.
Would there be a different term for it? What would you use?
I don't believe there would be a different term, but one nice one is a wellness plan, and
Okay.
there's documentation out there in the kind of general public forum. But clearly, it's a return to work process and interview. But for me, it's centered around like a wellness plan that should consider the holistic patient and all of those elements, and not just necessarily procedural elements, because there's far more to it, I think, than that.
So, what might a good return to work plan look like?
I would suggest not too early in, because I think when you're going through the treatment, you don't necessarily want to think about the steps too soon. You just want to cope and survive with the here and now. So be guided again by the employee in terms of what their medical plan is and when is a good time to have that conversation starter. Um, Decide how that person wants to be addressed. Maybe they're still at home, coming in for a meeting, maybe too onerous. We've just talked about, the hell of getting on a tram or a tube. So could that conversation take place via a phone call or Teams? Um, who does the employee want to know? Because some people want things to be kept quite private. So agree that level of confidentiality and privacy. Obviously, the more willing the employee is to have those conversations, and the more people are aware, the more supportive they can be. So again, going back to, I think the key word I want to use is that organizations need to be compassionate. They need to have empathy, just as the employee yourself needs to have self-belief, because at the time it utterly can feel overwhelming, but you've got to believe that all things are possible. And I think the employer needs to see the person as an individual, because my reaction to my treatment and plan would be different to yours. So, understand the different person's individual needs. Back to you mentioned about hours, responsibility. It needs to think about the job holistically. So my job involved a lot of travel, and as we mentioned before, I just knew it wasn't possible to catch early flights anymore. I used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning pre-COVID. I just can't do that anymore. So now I go the night before, or I adjust the schedule. I think they need to think about the tasks and how those are done. Could there be any reasonable adjustments made? So I can't do meetings all day anymore for 8 hours. It just utterly kills and limits any kind of creativity that I have. So how can you break that up? How can I tend to think by not always sitting at the desk? So break it, standing up and having a meeting or being outside. Um, I think you need to consider pace and sustainability. So we live in a goal orientated environment, KPIs, particularly depending on what job you live in, but it also could be, if you worked in hotels, it could be the number of bedrooms you clean, for example. You generally have a kind of um, work schedule, so that the employer needs to think that probably isn't practical anymore. So what is practical, and how can that be achieved? Could the person do a different job during their return to work? But again, be guided by them, because the employee doesn't want to feel that they've suddenly been pushed into a path that wasn't for them.
And how long should that support last?
I don't think you can prescribe a time to it, because again, we go back to, we're all different and we all react to the treatment different. Our treatment schedule is different in terms of number of years or drugs, and also not everybody reacts to it the same. I cope terribly bad with the hormone treatment, whereas somebody I met through one of the online forums that actually works in banking, it never bothered her one bit, and she was able to work far more than me during the treatment. So I think you have to really be led by the employee and keep having those conversations. I've been back to work 4 years now, and I would say I was a hell of a lot stronger and more confident and more feeling alive than I did when I first returned to work. But I wouldn't say that I still don't not need some adjustments. Back to what we were saying before, that I still don't think I can do a 9-hour day of meetings. If I've got a dinner or an event in the evening, you need to consider that. Again, that could be applied to somebody doing shift work. So what they can do when they return to work may evolve. But I also think that support needs to extend beyond that, because they may need practical steps both on the return to work and during that return, and accessing things that may be able to support them. So maybe there's an insurance that they can tap into, what medical cover is available, what counselling may they need. They might think they didn't need it when they were first diagnosed, but then they suddenly come back to work, and all those feelings and actually dealing with, oh my gosh, that's just happened to me. I now need to process that. Might require some counselling or support. Um, there's all sorts of things that just go beyond the kind of return to work plan, but are just about practicalities, about navigating your money, navigating your childcare, navigating how you're dealing with those feelings. I think can go on for years, and actually having that conversation open that they can say, I'm okay with that now, but this is now occurring, and I might just need some support with that, and that's okay.
So, am I right in understanding that the return plan is based on the individual? If they want it to be 5-10 years, and that's it, it's not
Yeah,
a TikTok situation. And I
for
guess
me,
I'm
yes.
just thinking about this, under legal protection, and it's hard, I think, for the individual to understand what should they be doing and what is just an option. And that's a really lovely thing to have. Tabitha, your workplace sounds fantastic that they've supported you. But I think lots of people go in and they're so scared to ask. So knowing, do you know what, at an absolute minimum, this is what they need to do is really helpful to understand. And Tabitha spoke earlier about, being classed as disabled.
Yeah, that's a protected
Yeah.
characteristic, and
Yeah.
and always will be. And so that is something that will always be relevant. From the moment that you're diagnosed with cancer, you will always have that. So I think what Lisa was saying about it morphing and changing as you go is so important, because on a daily basis you don't know what you're up against, and you have to be careful with illnesses. You have to be, bugs that go around the workplace happen all the time, and things like that affect you disproportionately to someone else that doesn't have a cancer diagnosis, or isn't on cancer treatment, or isn't recovering from cancer. And I think that, the way that I actually set it up with my employer is that if there's an appointment that I know about a long time in advance, maybe a month or so, then I'll book it in as planned medical leave. If it's an appointment that's I don't know, a therapy, acupuncture, counselling, whatever it is that I need to still be able to function in the workplace, I'll then work around it with my diary. So I'll be off for an hour, I'll be off for half a day, whatever it is that I need, and then I will try and make up that time. And then ultimately, if I can't make up that time, that's the reasonable adjustments. That is just in my mind, that's the price that I have to pay for being a cancer patient, and that's as far as it goes.
Lisa, could you tell us how cancer is protected under the Equality Act?
Yeah, I can. I mean, employers have a legal obligation, but I think irrelevant of the overarching legislation, and you put it quite clearly that you are protected and continue to be protected once you've had this diagnosis. If any employer is worth their salt, they'd want to be that way anyway, irrelevant of the legislation. You have a responsibility and duty of care. And that extends not just to the legislation and cancer, and obviously having protection under the Equality Act, but also just in simple things like health and safety. So if you can't think straight, or you're tired and your job maybe is driving or whatever, then there's going to need to be some sensible plan put into place so that person is safe on the road. So it's thinking about all of these things: the Equality Act, the health and safety, employment rights, but actually then putting those into practical steps. And it needs to be thought about as an employer in recruitment process. So if they're recruiting for somebody, they can't discriminate somebody that's going through treatment or declares that. They shouldn't be disadvantaged in terms of their terms and conditions and benefits. So I mentioned to you before about targets. So if there's a bonus plan in place, or some kind of targets that you're assessed against, that would probably need to be thought about in practical terms. What does that look like for me? We spoke very much today about having the ability to do things flexibly by using meetings and forums that didn't used to be available to us, which is great for those of us that have jobs that can do that. But there's a lot of jobs that are front facing that perhaps, Teams and Zoom is not applicable to them. So then the employer needs to think, well, practically, what does that look like? It also extends itself to opportunities for promotion and training, so they shouldn't be overlooked. Um, I was actually booked on a mental health first aid qualification when I was off having my chemotherapy, and my employer, and I don't say this wrongly because they've been wonderful to me, but they assumed that I didn't want to engage in that training and removed me from the attendance list, and I didn't receive the invitation. And I was like, hey guys, I'm here. Where's this invitation? And they were like, oh, we just assumed that you would want to do it. We know, you're really struggling at the moment. I was like, no, I am really struggling, but I really want to do that training because it'll make me more of a responsible HR person, but it'll also make me a better manager when I come back to work. And they did have to make adjustments even then because I actually lost my eyesight during my cancer. I could see, but I didn't have any mid-range vision, so I couldn't read properly. I couldn't use a computer properly. One of the reasons why I couldn't work. And I had to sit the exam verbally. And that was super. We just made adjustments. And the examiner asked me the questions and I answered them verbally and they made a note of the answer. So there's always things that you can do. But the reason for me saying this is that they shouldn't be discriminated or limited against training opportunities or promotion. That's really important. And also when it comes to ending employment, there's protection there as well. So there's lots of things I think, but I go back to there might be a legislation, but any employer worth their salt would really want to do this anyway because it makes them a better employer and also the employees far more likely to perform, engage, and want to work for somebody who has that ethical compass. Yeah.
And when does that protection end, if at all?
It doesn't end. Those reasonable adjustments will need to be assessed as we go along. We talked before about medical appointments. We talked about therapies. So those are things that they'll need to consider. But legally, the answer to that question is that will never end. They're always protected by that. And I think if they don't have those conversations, they've got that mechanism, that law behind them to support. But you would really hope that it doesn't come to that. Life's hard enough when you've had a cancer diagnosis and you're going through the treatment without having an employer that's just not aware of what it is to have a compassionate, supportive conversation and provide that support to anyone.
So can we just be really clear what employers are legally have to do?
So they need to ensure that the legislation is followed, both I said to you in Health and Safety and Equality Act and all the things that I said to you in terms of the right of access not being discriminated against in their contract and in how that plays itself out in training and promotion opportunities. They have a duty of care to be given reasonable adjustments, which could be time off for medical appointments, flexible hours. It could be extra breaks. It could be being more flexible about how that work is done. We've alluded to that today. But also just to put it out there that an employee is not required to necessarily disclose their cancer diagnosis. And I gave you an example of somebody that I knew that didn't, but an employer can only support somebody if it's fully aware of everything that's going on. But if I had to answer that in one sentence, an employer has legitimate interest to provide a workplace that is safe, supportive, and complies. But it's also extends to the employee that if they don't wish to disclose that diagnosis or be fully forthcoming with the symptoms and support that's required, it's quite difficult for an employer to actually do what I call a full holistic supportive approach if they don't know everything that they need to know.
If adjustments are refused, what can someone do?
I think first of all is having the confidence to have a conversation and say, you've refused this. Are you aware? I'm telling you this. This is the reason I'm asking for this. If that doesn't work, I would ask to speak to the line manager, I would recommend. If that doesn't work, involve HR and occupational health. And if all of those things don't work, have the confidence to put that in writing to express your needs. And if, again, those things don't work, explain to the employer what the consequences are of them not providing that support. And of course, you can pursue a more formal route, but you'd like to think that, again, that an employer would want to be supportive and that once they understand the reasons for that, and if they didn't, then there's obviously always a legal recourse available too. But for me, that should be very much a last option.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. So, Tabitha, you've spoken about your confidence, about your boundaries. What's the one thing that helped you the most when you returned to work?
From the employer or from me?
From both.
Okay. So the resources that are available to you, like the Life After Cancer course, are invaluable. I went through a number of charities and learnt about the symptoms and side effects that I was facing and how to try and make them better. So learning about brain fog and chemo brain, it's called colloquially cancer-related cognitive impairment, so CRCI, and how I can manage that was a game changer for giving me the language to talk about my symptoms and what I would need to help myself in the workplace. So that's the booking the meeting room for half an hour and doing acupuncture, lying down on the floor with silence, no light, eyes closed for 15 minutes, going outside, having walking meetings, taking calls. It's like I'm a tour guide of London at this point. I'm always walking somewhere. And even actually in meetings, if I can feel that my concentration is going, I'll stand up and start moving around in the back of the room. Standing desks, all these things seem so trivial when you're healthy. When you're not, they are just invaluable. They are ultimately kind of non-negotiable to be able to get through the day. So those details really matter. From the employer perspective, understanding I've been given flexibility, but I had to communicate why I needed true flexibility, not flexible hours. And the flexible hours concept was that, maybe I asked for a 8 till 3 or 9 till 5, whatever the adjustment is, but it's then a block. And the thing that is hard when you are unwell and recovering is that you can't predict on a day-to-day basis. You only really know when you wake up how you feel that day, and that can change throughout the day. So it has to be on a sort of hour-by-hour basis that you are monitoring your engagement in the workplace. So that's where true flexibility from the employer comes in, and the trust and integrity is so important. It's such an important foundation, and a really good way to build that trust is by being transparent and open with your employer. And I don't think there's any real way to sidestep that. I mean, I still need cancer buffer days, and I do also think, I haven't mentioned it, but I've thought it through as we've been talking through these questions. Anticipate checking in with yourself and taking the days to have a morning at Future Dreams House. Give yourself an afternoon, whatever it is that you need to make yourself feel better, to really check back in on how that cancer experience is going, because it's so easy to just plow back on with your life and not nurture the trauma that is a cancer diagnosis. So I make sure that I still build that in.
Thank you. Lisa, if someone's returning to work in the next couple of months, what do they need to be thinking through before they go back on day one? I know you've spoken through a lot and it's been really supportive. I think for me, having almost like a checklist, bullet points would be really helpful at this point.
So I think fundamentally, and if I can't stress it enough, return to work is not a single episode. It's, as we've said, it's very much part of a journey. It's almost like a series on Netflix, just different episodes and different things are going to happen. And therefore, don't prepare for that single episode, prepare for the series.
I love that.
In terms of the employee, the biggest advice that I could give before returning to work, make sure that you've consulted your medical professionals. I don't just mean your doctors, most important, they'll probably just write your fit note and be guided by you. And that's helpful, but it's just procedural. Speak to the other people that are involved in your care. So in my case, I'd recommend your oncologist, your radiotherapist, your Macmillan treatment, and just talk through your ideas and thoughts and go, does that resonate? And that's where I actually realised that my plan wasn't actually thought through. I was trying to apply my old self to my new situation just because I was still processing. So that would be my practical advice. That will then give you the medical clearance to come back on what terms, but keep that under review. So in my case, very similar to, as we say before, as I up my hours, I was having those check-ins with the medical professionals, and I was having to sometimes adjust. And I think we made a really good comment before about it's not just flexible hours in terms of 9 till 3, it's flexibility within the day. I regularly just had to break away, take a lie down, shut my eyes, And it's really reassuring for me today to know that you actually felt that, because I probably, if I'm being honest, even now felt that I was probably the only one of those people that actually felt that. So really nice to hear, and hopefully reassuring for other people who are listening to this to go, that's okay and that's normal to feel that way. Know your rights. I don't say that in a negative way, but then you'll know that you can have the courage and self-belief to articulate what that looks like and what your expectations are. And that extends to workplace policies, it extends to sick pay and reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act. Plan your schedule practically, not just for work, but for your whole life. So in my case, I had to think about children, I had to think about the dog, I had to think about my work, that it was a European role, what was really going to work for the business, but what was going to work for me, and think through those domestics and be prepared to adjust. So I could no longer do a 12-hour day, make a meal, walk the dog, and go to the gym. Some things had to give. Communicate both to your family, friends, and to the workplace what that looks like. And don't be afraid, as we said before, to say, I'm going to have to move this meeting, I'm going to have to push back. Could we think about doing it by teams? And then so that's sort of all the kind of before. And then going into the first few weeks back, pace yourself, be kind to yourself. It's a bit like coming back from maternity leave. Be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to rest. Allow yourself to say, this is good enough for today and tomorrow will be okay. Stay connected, both with your colleagues, but with what else is going on in the world, because you want to have that balance. And use the support that's available to you. So I talked before that some people might need counselling, you might need to go through some therapies, and tap into your employee assistance programs.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, I've got one more question before we go into a quick fire round.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that we've not touched on today in regards to return to work that you feel is really important that is shared?
I think the recurrence question doesn't really get factored into the return to work bit either. So we mentioned about the counselling. It's well known now and better documented that once you finish your active treatment, it's then a really, really challenging psychological time. And I think that within that is the fear of recurrence, and trying to articulate that in the workplace when family, friends, employees say, so you're all good now? Are you okay now? And you want to say,
it's all over.
We're getting there. I felt the tension between the safety net that I had built and that buffer that I had built that was important for me to know that I had, and the conversation around recurrence or you're better now. And that is still is always such a delicate balance, because you need your buffer. You need those cancer days. You really need to respect the challenging position that you've been put in through a diagnosis, and how that morphs through the years. It's okay if you say something and it's completely turned on its head the next day and it's not the case anymore. You thought you were better, but you're not. You thought you felt strong, but you're not feeling strong actually today.
Super piece of advice. I can so resonate to that.
Lisa, is there anything that you feel you've not covered today that's important to share?
I suppose we'll come back to it, but just to reassure people, you're going to be okay. And as you just said then, that it's okay to go back a step, to go forward. And some days you are going to feel like you go 4 steps back and only 2 forward, but other days you'll make a bigger leap, and that's okay. Just put trust in the process.
Wonderful. Okay, so I've got a quick fire round as we come to an end. What do you wish someone had told you before you went back to work?
Ask for flexibility.
Lisa, how about yourself?
Be practical.
If someone's listening and they feel like they're really failing at work, what would you want them to hear?
That's okay.
I agree. That's okay. Nobody's dead. As I said, it's only a chapter. Tomorrow's chapter will be different. Write yourself a new story.
What's one myth about returning to work after cancer?
That you'll have energy.
Yeah, so true. Once treatment ends, you'll go back to your old self and everything will just be the way it was.
I love the nod. No. What do you wish employers understood about life after cancer?
That it's changeable.
The same, and I keep saying this, it's a journey, it's a chapter, a bit like a book. There'll be twists, there'll be turns, the plot will be complex and it needs to be navigated, and they need to be there to support that path.
What would you tell your past self before you return to work?
You got this.
Yeah. Do, yeah, you've got this, and it's okay to not be okay. Take each day as it comes. Keep smiling.
What did you expect life after cancer treatment to be like, and what was the reality?
Changing goalposts all the time. That was the reality.
Yeah, curveballs. But the reality was not all bad as well. The reality and what came out of this for me superseded anything that I could have imagined. Um, find the silver linings and take the opportunities and turn bad into good, I would say, where you can.
What surprised you the most about life after treatment, good or challenging?
It became a vehicle for vulnerable conversations with other people.
Same. And for me, how I could take the darkest, toughest times of my entire life into something truly transformative, that I could use that experience to be a stronger parent, a better HR director, a better colleague, but also extend that experience to others through the kind of fundraising and the work that I've done. I could never have anticipated all the wonderful things that have come out of this blip, I say, in my life.
All right, I've just got a handful of more questions for you. What's one thing you wish someone had told you about life after treatment?
Learning the boundaries has been a real positive for my life. Being able to put them into practice.
This is going to change your life in reasons that you would never even begin to dream about. But that new life is going to be truly wonderful in a different way. Buckle, down, get that seatbelt on, and get on the ride, because you're on it anyway. So make the most of it.
I love that. Get that seatbelt on. Yes, so good.
Definitely get the seatbelt on.
Oh. What helped you the most after finishing treatment?
Therapy.
The outdoors, the beauty of the outdoors.
What is it really like when you finish cancer treatment?
Whiplash.
Yeah, car crash at times. Yeah.
What's something someone said to you post treatment that was really unhelpful?
Are you all good then?
I think mine was two. You've got the best kind of cancer, that if you're going to get one that you could have chosen, like I chose it. I know my mum said you were thin, but oh my gosh, you look so thin.
What could they have
But it's
said
the first time
instead?
I've been a skinny mini in my life.
Yeah. You look great.
What could they have said instead?
How are you feeling today?
Is there anything I can help you with? Or probably just when it's more practical now, just had a laugh with me, not really necessarily talked about it unless I decided to talk about it. Just treat me normally.
What's one small thing you would tell someone who's just finished cancer treatment to do to support themselves right now?
Get outside.
Yeah, there's a theme there, isn't there? And take responsibility for your own destination. Trust your body. It will give you cues. You'll know when you just need to rest. You'll know when you can do something, and that's okay. But yeah, get outside. Get that vitamin D in you.
If you could send a message to your post treatment self, what would you say?
Oh, you're doing really well.
Be brave. Have courage. Smile. Dig deep. You've got this.
All right, last question. What do you wish doctors or healthcare teams knew or understood more about life post treatment?
Exploring symptom management.
Elisa, how about yourself?
Yeah, and an investment in that training and skill set.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa.
So nice to speak to you, Lisa.
Thank you. You too.
If you're preparing to return to work after cancer or you're already back, here's what I hope you leave knowing. You are legally protected under the Equality Act from the point of diagnosis. You are allowed to ask for reasonable adjustments. And it is very normal if your pace, your priorities, or even your definition of success have shifted. Returning to work is not about proving you are back to who you were before. It's about finding a way of working that fits your energy, your life, and who you are now. I'd like to leave you with one thing to think about. What is one small adjustment that would make work feel more manageable right now? Thank you for listening. If you'd like support or community, you can find free online workshops, expert sessions, peer groups, and our 6-week program at life-aftercancer.co.uk. If this episode was helpful, you can follow the podcast or leave a review. It helps others find these conversations, and support information is always available in the show notes. Take care, and we'll see you next time.